Hello and welcome to the Matchbook Horse Racing Podcast, where I'm pleased to say it's me, Tom Stanley, and just one other today, which is Jane Mangan. We're either sides of the Irish Sea, and we're going to be previewing, in the main, some Group 1 juvenile action this weekend, which takes place over at Newmarket with the two Group 1s, the Cheveley Park and the Middle Park as well. And there's a good weight of Irish versus British and a bit of French thrown in there as well. Jane, there's a fair bit to look forward to. Have we got for you, potentially the two best Group 1s for Colts and Fillies we've seen so far? I suppose we've had a fair bit of good stuff already.
Yeah, I suppose it's very hard to get excited about any other juvenile this year after seeing Pinatubo win the National Stakes. So this has more depth. I think the Middle Park is probably the best in-depth 2-year-old race we have this year. I was taught the Pre-Morney a couple of weeks ago was top class, but this seems even better. So hopefully they all turn up and run their race.
Well, that's the interesting thing about the both respective races, because the market for the Juddmonte Middle Park is headed by Earth Lights, around about 3.0, who was, of course, the morning winner, and Raffle Prize, who was a next second. She's a bit shorter, conversely, in the preceding race, which is the Cheveley Park. So that form is well represented. We'll kick off with the Middle Park, and you've got Earth Light in there at 3.0. Around about a point bigger is Mum's Tipple, or just under that. 5.5 for Siskin. Don McLean and I did a podcast earlier on in the week, the Matchbook Racing Review, where we looked ahead to this and argued that a pretty solid 6.0 Siskin was far too big. And we were right, Jane, because he's half a point shorter now.
And look what happened. Everybody listened to yourself and Don, and we have a little bit more sense in the prices, but at the same time, Mum's Tipple is still much shorter. And I know he was like amazing in the sales race, but it's Group 1 level that the other horses have been competing at, and he'll have to taste this for the first time, and not just in the last furlong of the race. He'll have to taste it for the first time, jump out and go that pace. So I find it very interesting that Richard Hannon has threat in there as well. Maybe it's the right race for both horses, but I would question if you had really a true superstar, would you run two in it? Maybe.
I think the interesting thing with that is, after he won the Gimcrack, I got to interview him for Racing TV, and he sort of quite clearly said, I won't run them against each other. But that was in relation to their next start. Now, we haven't seen Mum's Tipple since. There was a chance for both of them Doncaster on their agenda, and of course that is exactly where threat turned up. 7 furlongs, did he excel over it? Well, I don't necessarily think he looked any better than he had done over 6, so I can see why they're reverting to this trip. But they're different owners, and it is interesting they show up together. And I think if you stuck a microphone in Richard Hannon's face now and said which one is not the most likely winner but the better bet, well, at 13.0, I think he'd say Threat, because he's maintained throughout the year that Threat is the better workhorse at home and the horse he's been most excited about. However, what Mum's Tipple did on the clock was very impressive. It was quicker than the Lowther, the preceding race. And, I mean, it was... The fact that we came away from York talking about Mum's Tipple and not Enable just shows how exciting a performance it was. But sorry to be boring, I really agree with you on what Mum's Tipple is going to have to do in the early part of the race. In a Group 1 contest, there will be horses in and around him, which didn't really happen after a couple of furlongs at York. And the way he accelerated away was hugely impressive. The one thing I do think is in his favour, we're doing this on Friday morning, so we haven't got as the races that I'd love to have seen today showing us where you want to be. But we saw yesterday, look, it's not easy always to come from off the pace at Newmarket and the Rowley Mile. And he is the most likely horse to go forward. So that is one, I sort of worked my way up from the betting and thought, what's going to give Earthlight a nice toe into the race, because I like the horse so much. But I think one thing massively in this horse's favour, and the stalls are drawn centre, and I'd imagine that's where they'll come. For all, we have seen a tendency to come stand side here before. But I think he will be up there, and he'll be up there punching, and he'll be up there going very quick. So that's a positive. But at those prices, I'd just simply flip Siskin and Mum's Tipple around, Jane, and I think Siskin, for what he's achieved, he's a Group 1 winner, and he's third in the betting, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, tactics are very interesting always, but I just think you made a valid point there. Mum's Tipple drawn 3, likely to go forward, and maybe will opt to keep it simple. But King Neptune is drawn 1, and could ultimately give him a challenge for the first part of the race that he mightn't have ever experienced before. Because let's be honest, he got it all his own way last day because nothing could actually be comfortable lying up with him. So that's one other spectrum to consider. And totally agree with Siskin. I really like the horse. I think he's got a really, number one, good attitude, but he's really a docile horse. If you see him at the track tomorrow, he took the preliminaries and everything so well at the Curragh. He was like a handicapper, and for a 2-year-old, that's a massive plus. Earthlight for me is too short. I thought he was very good in the pre-morning. I think Raffle Prize is really good. We'll get to Cheveley Park in a little bit, but at the prices, Siskin is a bit of an insult to a horse who's a very similar profile to Farb's horse. 4 runs, 4 wins, has never really looked in an awful lot of trouble in a race. He's never looked like he's going to get beaten. And look, I don't make prices, but that's a bit nonsensical. Monarch of Egypt for me is another horse that's going to step forward. Again, I thought he was good on, like Siskin and himself, they wouldn't have liked the ground in the Phoenix Stakes. Both horses, I thought, when they quickened, the wheels were spinning a little bit. I hope they get a sounder surface tomorrow. Monarch of Egypt, he's, what price is he, Tom?
About 10.0.
Yeah, I don't see him being out of the first 3. I think, well, he mightn't beat Earthlight Siskin again, but I think he's going to be bang there. For Aidan to keep putting him forward as his first string for these Group 1s is a compliment to the horse, because they have so many other options. And he obviously had his troubles during the year, hasn't had a hard year, where some of these have been a little bit busy. Threat has been a little bit, or even Opie Fernandez, but this horse has every reason to step forward. I'd be disappointed if he didn't.
Yeah, and there was obviously a chance that he was going to go to the national stage. I can imagine Jer and Teddy Grinthorpe got on the phone after that and thought, yeah, quite glad we stuck to 6. We don't need to take on that Pinatubo just yet. But does he, to your mind, look like an out-and-out 6 furlong horse, Siskin?
Yeah, he's not a robust type. He's to coin a phrase that's used way too often, he's a real 2-year-old. And he was ready very early in the season, but yet Jer hasn't over-raced him. And I just like the fact that he has never gone out on track and come in with his head down exhausted, because he's never really had to be pressured to maximum. I think he's never looked like a horse that's going to get beaten. So Earthlight got a hard race on soft ground in France, and you just don't know how that'll affect a 2-year-old. Under Farb wouldn't come if you thought he was going to get beaten, but at the same time, at the prices, I'd take him on for Siskin to beat him and potentially Monarch of Egypt to be placed.
My thing with the reason I like Monarch of Egypt I haven't backed him, and I'm not sure I will, but it's the sort of the Irish Champions Weekend factor with Aidan O'Brien that we saw a few weeks ago, where there are a few horses in there who I'd been keen on previously. Love was one of them. I fancied her over Alpine Star, which obviously turned out to be completely wrong, and I can't wait to see them match up again. Fairyland was a filly I backed a couple of times this year, left her alone, but he can't half get them to peak. But having said that, I thought, you know, when Monarch of Egypt ran against Siskin in June, I thought I could understand why perhaps he was beaten. He'd had a bit of time off. He was up over 6. He's a horse who I thought actually ultimately looks to want further anyway. But then when he went to the Curragh back in August, I thought this is the time where he's going to improve past Siskin. And he didn't. But there's still that factor at the back of my mind that this horse is very much yet to peak. Yeah,
I can't draw a conclusion until you see them on a sound surface against each other. Yes, the soft ground at the Curragh would not have suited Siskin, but if you rewatch it, Monarch of Egypt, when Ryan asked him to go, yes, they quickened to a certain extent, but he was floundering the last half furlong. That was either the ground or he was either coming to the end of his tether, and I'm at the moment willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. I just think Aidan would have a lot of options for the middle park. He's won it the last 2 years, like 10 Sovereigns. We saw Wichita yesterday. Like, that was whatever he beat, that was a very impressive performance. And US Navy Flag 2 years ago. He's a lot of those war front, none and ever type horses that could have ran in this, and he's put forward the American Pharaoh. So look, we'll wait and see, but I'd be an each way punter with him and potentially Siskin to take the honours.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about the ground, the point you make there, is that there was all the talk was about, you know, Jer coming out and saying about Siskin for the soft ground and saying how worried they were, but less of it was made of Aidan's horse, Monarch of Egypt. But actually, perhaps when you look at it, maybe it suited Monarch of Egypt even less. but it was still the fact was, Siskin was the short price favourite, and he was the one that was going to suffer on the ground, and he won despite not liking the ground, and he'll be better on a sounder surface. But we'll take the point about the second that day. To sum up the middle part views, then, I think Earthlight is the best horse in the race, and I could argue that given Mums Tipple's proximity to him, I'd push that horse out and have him a fair bit shorter for I'd nibble Siskin in as well. But I think 3.0 about Earthlight, the morning's the best form, and he's the horse I want to be with. I would hope for a little bit of rain today. I'm going there today, and I wouldn't begrudge a little bit of rain falling, because he's yet to try anything quicker than good. And there was some times which cropped up on the Thursday which suggested we could be quickening up a bit if we don't get any of the Friday's rain. But as long as it's good ground, and I think it probably will be, I'd be pretty happy with Earthlight on side. Jane, you sum up your thoughts?
Yeah, that's another spectrum. So if the ground turns soft, you have to be with Earthlight. Like, as short as he is, it's going to go against the two horses that I've been talking up, Siskin and Monarch of Egypt. That's a really deciding factor. I'd be really disappointed if it turns up anything worse than good, because I don't think you'll have a level playing field to draw a conclusion at the end of the year. You want to know what is actually the second best 2-year-old, because let's be honest, Pinatubo probably won't be matched. But Earthlight would be unopposable for me on soft ground, because the Irish horses need a sound surface.
But otherwise, Siskin should be shorter, and Monarch of Egypt certainly to place.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, let's kick on to the Cheveley part, which I feel started with the middle park. I'm only doing that because it's probably the slightly deeper race for me, and I can't wait for it. It's the one I've been most excited going forward into the weekend. But as you mentioned, Raffle Prize has been pretty good this year on all her starts, in particular that neck defeat to Earthlight last time in the Prix-Morny. And then Andre Fabre sends over Trobeau, who's back in trip, though she hasn't lacked the speed so far. She's another one. We mentioned Earthlight. She's shown her best on soft ground to date. In fact, every start she's had a bit of soft in the going description. Lau, the winner living in the past, is in there. Etoile, she hasn't been seen for 132 days. She's about 11.0. I should be giving you the prices, shouldn't I? 8.0 for living in the past, 5.5 Trobeau, and Raffle Prize is at 2.25. So it's a fascinating little market. It's a fascinating race. At the start of the week, Jane, I was very positive about Raffle Prize. She was a fair bit bigger and saying it's the best form. But I'm warming to the French maestro who's never won a Cheveley Park. You kick us off, Jane.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of Andre Fabre's Trobeau. I can't find parallels in form. She's been impressive in what she's done, and Andre rarely comes to Newmarket for the fun of it. But I was a big fan of Raffle Prize all season, and I was disappointed she got beaten in the Prix-Morny. Like, obviously taking on the post was a massive ask, but she went down fighting. The two pulled clear of a classic field on soft ground. I think she's been to the well plenty of times this year. I think this will be her 6th start, but she deserves to be favoured. Frankie, obviously, this will be his 17th Group 1 winner, I think, if this goes in.
Is that all?
Yeah, it's been a moderate year. Look, she was very good in the Duchess Cambridge. Like, it's unusual for a 2-year-old filly to hold her form as well as she has from the Queen Mary from Chester, to keep going forward like she has. Will it come to an end? I hope it doesn't. I think this is a very good renewal of the Cheveley Park. Aidan has won the last 3 renewals of this race, but this filly, on all spectrums of form, is the one to beat. I know she's short, but for me, she's my Earthlight. You're unopposable for Earthlight. I'm unopposable Raffle Prize. And
the point you make is, she's been to well a few times. We know how good she is. She's rated 113. She's top rated in the field, and we've seen the very best of her. And I think a lot of people might be looking at it and saying, well, she's run a fair few times now. There could be something else which is just going to improve past her. But Lumiere won this, although I think only on her 3rd start for Mark Dodson a few years ago. Look at the Last Lion, what he did on this day a few years back, having run a fair few times. But it doesn't by any means mean that she's stopped improving. And one thing I like, which I talked about in the middle park, I like her race style for this track and this race. However, in comparison to the middle park, there are a bundle that like to crack on with things here, and a bundle that show early pace. Nina Ballerina, Tango in the first time blinkers will surely be ridden pretty handy, you'd imagine, out of 3. Nurse Barbara went forward last time. She was just pipped at Leopardstown by Blissful. She's back in trip. Milal's gone forward before. Living in the Past did in the Lowther. So I think that one of the most interesting parts of the race, Jane, will be where they all are after a furlong and how they all sort themselves out.
Yeah, I don't think Raffle Price has to necessarily have her head in front. She's become more professional with her racing. I don't think she'll have to go blistering in front, whereas I think Tango is like a real conundrum. She must be a filly that works the house down at home, because she's been, despite her form not indicating as such, she's been pitched in at the highest level all the way along, ran in the Moiglair, backed off the boards very late on, went from 25s to 9s in first time cheek pieces, made the running, and was there, bang there to a furlong down. She got tightened for room then and ended up being snatched up and not ultimately ridden out to the line. So then when you see a 7 next to her name, you're thinking, oh, it was an abysmal run. It actually wasn't. And I wonder, coming back a furlong, she's daughter none in ever. I think coming back to 6 will suit her. But she, to me, is unreliable in that whether she'll give it to you or not. So while she's a big price, I can't recommend that she'd be reliable enough to give her true running. But she must be, to keep Pitchy Arena Group 1 level, she must be good, especially when Donica is on Etoile and Ryan rides Tango. So she's one that could just be a thorn in the side and make us all look stupid. Living in the Past has to be mentioned. The Lowther form, typically, it's a good measuring stick of a race, and she's a good solid filly as well. But for me, Raffle Prize is £5 ahead on ratings on everything, running off levels with everything, and I can't even recommend a filly to get close to her, to be honest.
See, this is what I was saying at the start of the week, and sometimes when you look at things harder and harder, I've sort of talked myself out of her. For all she's a little bit shorter looking at it now, and I hadn't had a good look at Trobeau.
Is Raffle Prize the best 2-year-old filly we've seen this year?
Yes, given the little we've seen of Alpine Star. She's certainly the quickest. But of course, they're different types, aren't they? The latter of which is going to go up to the Fillies Mile. But I mean, her form looks very, very strong from the race, I forget its name, where she beat Love, etc. So, was it the debutant? But either way, I think she is.
Shane Foley, the rider of Jessica Harrington's String, come out during the week and tell us that Cayenne Pepper is his favourite.
Yeah, but what are the lads at Ryden now?
You have 4 or 5 champions, you tend to have none. So yeah. I just want to wait and see, will they all line up on the Fillies Mile and educate us a little bit more. But for me, Raffle Prize on what we've done and seen so far is shoulders above the rest of them.
Well, I remember, it's interesting. Do you remember when Visionary came out and did what he did in that maiden at Newmarket? And then I know went back to the July Stakes and was very disappointing. But leading into that, I had a chat with Charlie Johnston, who said, we do think he's really good. And goodness me, the only thing that can keep up with him, etc., is Raffle Prize and actually go past him. But weirdly, more so than this filly, Visionary had that buzz. A bit like a mum's tipple. We're a weird bunch, are we? Because when a horse goes and does it on debut or in a lesser race and wins by that amount, we can get awfully carried away. And I feel he had more buzz about him than Raffle Prize did, even though I think at that point, pretty sure that was after Ascot, after she'd won her Group 2 at Ascot, the Queen Mary. So, but she's definitely getting that recognition now. And I think that Earthlight form is the best bit of form coming into the race. But I do like the Trobeau angle back in trip if we don't have anything quicker than good. And I think the Weather Watch is going to be interesting again, because she's proved herself over further on ground with a bit of cut in it. But she doesn't lack for speed. There's a July Cup winner in her pedigree as well. She's able to lay up there, I know, over 7. She's interested me an awful lot now at 5.5. And I'm thinking of deserting Raffle Prize. But I might just wait for a bet with regard, just seeing how much rain comes today for me in this. Do you have anything to add on? Where are we with Etoile and and Tanga. I know you've talked about Tanga. I mean, Etoile could be very interesting. She must have had a setback, yes, not to have been seen since May and a missed Albany.
I'd imagine things probably just went pear-shaped during the winter or during the summer, and they just said they get her back for the end of the year. But it's an ultimate compliment for her to have been thrown into Pattern Company on debut and then to go and do what she did. I think the market was surprised. I don't think she was a particularly strong supporter that day. Seamus Heffernan rode her, so she wasn't even first string. But second run pitched in a Group 1 level, again another compliment, but it's hard to see her. It would take a massive performance for her to come back and even pressure the likes of a raffle prize on only her second start. Maybe she'll do it. Maybe we'll be saying she's the best 2-year-old filly in a week's time, but I would prefer see it than tell somebody put their money on it. Nurse Barbara, for anybody who is of interest, I think she's supplemented for this race by Ger Lyons. She's a very small filly. She ran massive in Leopardstown and Irish Champions weekend. She's very small, and I think she'd have actually won if her neck was a little bit longer. She just got nailed on the line. For her connections, it was really, really tough. I thought everywhere she'd held on until Blissful ran her down, but she ran keen in the hands of Colin Keane at the start of the race, and she'll need to be more professional in a race of this calibre. But she's quite buzzy, so watch her in the preliminaries and hopefully she doesn't boil over and give it away, because connections have been brave by putting her in here. And
that makes me feel so desperately sorry for her that if she's had a bigger neck, and she probably would have done. There was nothing in it.
It was a whisker, a shadow, and I thought Ryan was particularly good on Blissful on the day as well, because I'd say Blissful was thinking, do I really want to win this? And Ryan said, yes, you do. And that then ultimately started the steam train that was Ballydoyle on Irish Champions weekend. Whereas the last 2 years, Champions weekend wasn't that friendly to Ballydoyle. This year, it was complete contrast. And when things go your way, everything seems to fall right for you. And that was just one of those cases where it didn't fall right for Ger Lyons and Colin Keane.
Right, let's sum up our thoughts on the Cheveley Park. You get to kick off this time. I'm still on that fence.
Well, I'm predictable. I'm raffle prize all day long, and take what you want to be placed. But raffle prize for me is the best filly, a 2-year-old filly this year. And
having been all team raffle prize earlier on in the week, as she's just shortened up a touch, I'm warming to André Fabre's filly Trebeau, mainly because I like saying it with a bit of a French lilt. Thank you. But also, I think if there's a bit of rain Friday afternoon and there's no sting in that ground, I think they'll go hard here. And I think it might suit her. She doesn't lack for pace either. And I think she could cause a bit of a surprise around about 5.5. Right. We get to move on to, we're going to do one race each now, Jane and I. You're going to look at the Beresford, which is Sunday at the Curragh. We don't know the official field yet, do we?
We don't, no.
So we're going to have you like to set yourself a challenge. I like that.
A guessing game. Who doesn't?
Having said that, more of a guessing game is the Cambridgeshire, which takes place on Saturday afternoon at 3:40, which looks a typically hard race to solve. I know that our very own Michael DC fancy that Bedouin Story could go well at a price, because he sent our group a video at 7:15 this morning with his little lad just to prove that he is up at this time. So fair play to him, well done. So that might interest some. A couple of points to make about the race, which is where we'll start, if you don't mind, Jane, with the Cambridgeshire. It's a very interesting setup draw-wise. Everyone talk about where you want to be drawn. We saw a few years where you wanted to be stand side and those high numbers, and then a couple of years ago we had a huge price surprise far side who was pretty much up there throughout. You want a horse that can lay up and travel. That's obvious. If you're off it halfway and out the back, for all you might look like you're going to run on, it's going to be very difficult to do so. A lot of the pace, the main pace which is going to hold up, is low. However, if you look right at the top of the market, and they're struggling to split them on the Matchbook Exchange at the moment, but you can get around about 9.0 for each of the three, with Good Birthday, La Don de Vie, and fifth position and Lord North actually about a point bigger. Now they're drawn 29, 24, 33 and 32. Now, for all they're not obvious pace angles, they are surely where the market has them, and the fact that they're all unexposed 3-year-olds between them who've got a good record in the race, they're going to be up there for the longest amount of time. So, you know, that could well be where the race develops. So I think that's when you get at that cluster of fancied horses all drawn in and around each other, it can be a huge pointer as to where the race is going to develop. If I had to choose one, and actually, Jane, you mentioned this, having had a quick look at it, Lord North for me, who's just a couple of points bigger off the top of the betting. Of course, they won it, John Gosden and Frankie Dettori, with the 3-year-old last year in the form of Wissahickon. He's got a good record in the race, John Gosden. This horse had a break since running in behind King of Comedy at Sandown in May, came back and was just beaten over a mile at Ascot. Not necessarily by a quicker horse, but I think Lord North perhaps will improve for that run. He does look like he wants further anyway. And I think he's the obvious one. So if you wanted to have him on side, I would. The other one who I think is really interesting is Alan King's Beringer. Claimers have got a decent record in this race. I think 3 have won it in the last 10 years. Thorhammer Hansen, I've been very impressed with this year. He claims 5. Stall 15, I'd like it a bit higher, but it's okay. I'm not necessarily, people say they have options from the middle, but I don't think he's going to choose one side or the other. I think, you know, you'll probably develop into 3 groups here. And I think he'll be okay there. And he will have options later on. York was a write-off. He has got good form at York from the year before, from last year. But a lot of horses disappoint there. And I think on quick ground at York, it really doesn't suit this horse. He doesn't fully let himself down in it for all he's won on quick ground before. He's never been out the first 2 at this track. He won at the start of the year off a pound lower. And he's got a big race in him when it all falls right and they go hard enough, and they might do here. So Beringer's 26.0. I definitely back him in the place market. Cambridgeshire, done.
Boom. First and placed. There you go.
We got the forecast for the Cambridgeshire. Beat that.
Is it one question, right? Because we're all guilty of this, and we were just talking about a horse, Visionary, who wins first time out, and you start to dream and you start to hype. Is Lord North one of those horses where he's so unexposed? We're hoping he could be better than a mark of 98, but he absolutely could be, just that he's an average horse. I like those type of profiles in these handicaps because the handicapper hasn't had a chance to properly assess him. So you could be teetering on the edge of either.
Yeah, the thing I think, the one thing I think makes Lord North so interesting is, when did John Gosden decide, and it may have been the connections, I doubt it. I'm pretty sure that it was John Gosden saying, this horse will run in the Cambridgeshire. Now, when was that decision made? I'd venture it probably wasn't necessarily made when he went into Sandown listed company on his 3rd start and drifted like an absolute barge out to 10-1. He was a bit tricky going down, but we didn't make too much of that because King of Comedy, his stable companion, was an absolute nutcase. So that was all the focus on him. This horse drifted. He finished last. He didn't run any sort of race. He got a mark of 98. But I'd venture in that interim period between the 23rd of May and the 6th of September, where they brought him back, they thought this will be the likely type for the Cambridgeshire, which they won with Wissahickon last year as a 3-year-old. I don't know how many starts he'd had going into it, actually, I confess.
He was exposed as well because he had a couple of ones next to his name on all-weather tracks, I think. This horse getting gelded as well, you'd think.
Yeah.
Doesn't gelding a horse, you could even potentially bring about more improvement. Yeah. So I'm just saying we are suckers for the horse that is even more risky because you don't have a real handle on him because he's so unexposed.
But that's it, isn't it? The 2 horses I mentioned, Beringer, you sort of know where you are. You'd be disappointed if he's out of the first 6. I certainly would be. Because you sort of, you got course form tick. You know he's waited to go close and he needs it to work out for him. And I like the fact he's got a claimer on. But then you got this horse, you're quite right, who you say, well, we've only seen him four times. But
Frankie on, which is
and you've got to take the weight of, you know how much John Gosden likes chucking a 3-year-old dart at this race, and you just know it a bit on his agenda. And I like his profile a lot coming in here. But he was beaten last time, which means that I can see why Good Birthday and La Don de Vie are perhaps just going to go off that bit shorter. But I like his draw as well. I think at 11.0 he's a very fair bet. However, Beringer certainly in that place market could be really interesting. I mean, it's a tough one. I wouldn't be crying into my hands if I didn't get the winner, but I'm hopeful. Say again?
Just the 30-odd horses.
That's all right. You've probably got about a similar amount in the Beresford to pick your way through, but do you have any idea? The obvious question is, I mean, do you know, I was going through the recent winners of the race. This sounds ridiculous, but I'd sort of forgotten it was Japan and the Niarchos horse who lines up today as I look at it.
Mount Everest.
Yes, Mount Everest, who was really exciting. I mean, you had some proper renewals of this race, haven't you? And some serious winners. And Japan last year was one of those. So I suppose what the question is, what do you think is likely to turn up from Team Ballydoyle?
Well, the last time Aidan O'Brien didn't win this race was 9 years ago when Casamento from Mick Halford upset the odds. And Aidan, like, he doesn't just win this race, he uses it as a springboard for his good potential middle distance 3-year-olds. If you take his last 3 winners, he's won it the last 8 years in a row, but if you take his last 3 winners, he had Capri, Saxon Warrior, and Japan. So anybody who's watching this race, even if you're not having a bet, watch it with great interest, because he uses this for good horses that could potentially be anti-post bets for the Derby or something next year. It's hard to know. He runs a few in the Royal Lodge that were also entered in this, so we can kind of narrow it down. I think Persia for me is the one that stands out. He isn't a talking horse as such. A lot of his stable mates maybe get more credit than he did, but when he won his maiden at Galway, he won by 5 lengths. Winning 5 lengths up Galway is like a very impressive performance from a 2-year-old for me. He beat a horse called Altair, who had a couple of nice runs from Michael Halford. He hasn't won since, but it's not that long ago. So for me, I think Persia is a horse that could announce himself this weekend. I hope he can. He's got Shechem in there for Dermot Weld, won his maiden last time, beat a horse called Louisiana of Ballydoyle's, who had run a very nice race on debut. And Agitaire for Jim Bulger, who contested a Group 1 last time as well. But Aidan, he tends to take it slowly with these Galileos. That's why we say we have an American Pharaoh and a Nona Never in the Cheveley Park and the Middle Park. But this is a mile. This is Galileos where they come into their own. Persia is out of a mare who won a Guineas trial and then went on to be placed in an Oaks and the Guineas. So class from both sides. And we've only seen him twice. He had a very quiet introduction on debut, and then he really announced himself at Galway for me. So Persia is a horse I think could be on a lot of people's radars after this Sunday.
I just pick up on the point you make about the Royal Lodge and the comparison between what he runs in what. I mean, you'd look at last year, for example, and see Japan winning the Beresford and the horses he ran in the Royal Lodge, and suggest that is it fair to say, have a preference for this race over the Royal Lodge, but obviously target the Group 1s for the sprinters over at Newmarket in comparison. Is that fair? Yeah,
well, I suppose number one, the Curragh is just closer to home, and it's easier to bring the good horses up the road rather than taking on the best of British as well. But this race is always, whether it's Ballydoyle or whoever, like See the Stars has won this race, St. Nicholas Abbey, as I said, Casamento, this is Azamur, Alamshar, they've all contested this race. This is a Group 1 in name, but tends to produce a star. And while, look, obviously you don't have to have a star in it every year, the best Irish yards like to contest this race. It really shows them what they have going forward, because you need to take on the Ballydoyle battalion to know if you can beat them next year potentially. And I think Shechem is probably outside of Aidan the strongest contender. But yeah, I think Aidan sends a good horse to this race, and Persia is a horse that could just be above average.
Is he potentially the best middle distance colt for next year that we've seen from this team so far?
Well, Mogul for me was good at.
Yeah, he was pretty good on Irish Champions Weekend, wasn't he? So was that set? That was 7, was it?
Sorry.
Oh no, that was the Marley one over Mogul, wasn't it?
Yeah, he won the Champion Juvenile Stakes, and while some people said he wasn't all that impressive, he beat a decent horse of Michael Halford's, whose name escapes me now, the Aga Khan horse.
Sinawan.
Sinuan, and he was pricking his ears doing it. And I watched him after the line, and he was the last to pull up. That race was won by Mad Moon last year. Mad Moon made us all look a little bit silly on the Irish Champions Stakes. But yeah, Mogul has got, for me, the best middle distance form so far. But hopefully another horse. These Galileos tend to come into their own at this time of year. So
yeah, and both, as you say, Persia and Mogul, both sons of Galileo. Good stuff. We have no prices for yet as the Beresford, but you'd imagine if Persia shows up, you might well just head the betting. But let's see. Good stuff. Right. Best bets time. Best bets for the weekends between Newmarket and perhaps the Curragh with the Beresford as well. You get to go first, Jane.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. I think you told me Monarch of Egypt is something 10 point something.
10.0 Monarch of Egypt.
Yes, I'm going to take him each way in the middle park.
Monarch of Egypt for a place in the middle park. Do you know, I'm gonna approach my best bet the same way in the place market and say Beringer in the Cambridgeshire for me, for Alan King with Thorhammer Hansen on board. For all, I'm tempted by Earthlight. I'm on ground watch for Newmarket, so I'm going to stick with Beringer, who will be absolutely fine, whatever happens, as long as it's not extremes. It's a good weekend, isn't it?
It's all right. Yeah.
It'll do.
Yeah, look, the 2-year-olds take centre stage at this time of year. We go to Paris next weekend, but this weekend it is about the 2-year-olds, and we'll find out if there's anything around. Number one, if Rapid Prize is the best filly, and number two, if there's any colt next year that could potentially give Pinatubo a run.
And you mentioned Paris, of course. We'll be previewing the Arc into next week, which, my goodness, it could be a monumental weekend. We'll also be chucking out in the coming weeks a couple of National Hunt podcasts for you, which are going to be previewing the National Hunt season. No weekend specifics. We're still a month away from the first meeting at Cheltenham. Always feels weird saying it for the first time, but we are.
Navan is on Saturday, and Navan is the indicator for Ireland that the soft ground is coming back.
You are quite right. The rains are coming. But we will be giving you we're going to do 2 podcasts, one on chasers, one on hurdlers, that will give you about 45 minutes to an hour on each of those to whet your appetite for the National Hunt season. But it's flat mode for the moment, and 2 Group 1s this weekend, which we're very much looking forward to. Jane, thank you very much.
Pleasure as always.
Pleasure as always, and thanks to those of you at home for watching. We'll chat to you again soon. Bye for now.